I know there has been a broader
I'm
and
thinking
in some
about my
ways more
friend.
esoteric
What are they
discussion
thinking about?
proposed reforms of the UN Security Council and the way that it works. There have been some proposals to enlarge it. Our friends in India are certainly interested in benefiting from reforms like that.
Josh, what are they talking about?
As it relates to the situation inside of Syria, I think,
What
our
are they talking
concern,
about?
our most urgent concern, is with the way that Russia has used their veto authority
They've been talking
on the
about
Security
people
Council
online.
at the United Nations.
So is that something that should be done and should be looked at more closely now, or
They don't have a
do you feel like
government
now is
name
not
of the
the time
person
for
they're
that?
talking about.
Not really going to do anything at this point.
I think many United Nations processes are characterized by the length of time it takes to
I'm thinking of
complete
people
them.
I love.
And surely the idea of reforming those processes
But they all
is
look alike.
also likely to take a long time too. So, we've expressed in other
Do they have
contexts our
definite
support
names of the
for
people they're talking
a set of
about?
reforms that could make the United Nations more efficient, more
Everyone I
effective,
know
and
is a
potentially more
twin.
representative. But our focus right now is on trying to reduce
Everyone
the
I know
violence
is
and
a
urgent
twin.
situation inside of Syria. Justin.
I guess I wanted to follow on a couple
Big
of
Bird
things
is
Michelle
my
asked about.
friend.
First,
I love Big
veto
Bird.
conversation is particularly relevant is
Who doesn't love Big Bird?
considering sanctions against companies in response to chemical weapons use in
Do you
Syria.
have a government
I
name
know
of the
that
person you're discussing?
talk about sanctions before they happen, but would the U.S. be willing to pursue sanctions with Europe and other allies outside the framework of the UN to address concerns in Syria?
We're talking about violence.
Well, there are other examples of the United States being able to work effectively outside the auspices of the UN to implement sanctions in a coordinated fashion to maximize the
In
impact
order for me to answer
of those
questions, you
sanctions.
have to be in
So the
agreement with
situation in Ukraine is
acceptance.
obviously the best example where the United States has been able to work
With a 10-year term,
effectively with our European allies to
restitution of
impose
funds.
tough sanctions against Russia. Of course, I would be among the first to point out that the
That's right. We're not
sanctions that we
waiving.
have
Whoever
imposed
said that.
on Russia in concert with our European allies
We're not
as a
waiving
result
the
of
attorney,
Russia's
I told you.
actions in Ukraine have not yet achieved
We
the
have
desired
not
result.
yet
We haven't
told
seen
you.
the change in strategy on the part of the Russians that we'd like to see
We
in
have not
Ukraine.
yet.
We haven't seen them indicate their clear respect for the territorial integrity and
All
sovereignty.
we can say the date of the video was yesterday,
But we do know that those sanctions have had an impact on Russia's economy.
October 6th.
Russia
That's
is
all we can say.
paying
We
the
can't show
price
the video.
for their actions inside of Ukraine. And that price is one that they have to pay because of the ability of the United States to work effectively with our European partners to impose those costs.
I don't know. Look what
That's something that we didn't do through the UN, obviously, because Russia
they got
has
that we're not
a
waiving.
veto on the UN Security Council. So that's
does that
one
mean?
example of where we have been willing to work outside the
Where did
auspices
they go?
of the United Nations, but in a way that has had
United
an impact,
Nations.
even if we have not yet
So
achieved
fine.
the desired result. So, what I would say is our preference is always to work through the UN when it comes
What
to
is the charge
implementing
called?
these sanctions, because it means that even more countries are able to coordinate their actions with the United
Talking?
States, which essentially has a
Betting?
multiplier effect in terms of the strength of the
80?
sanctions and the size of the cost.
Parthashan?
But outside of, we do have options,
Wish me
and
luck.
we have demonstrated an ability to work
I don't know
outside
what
of
that
the
means.
UN to achieve a similar result. So I guess the point is, in this case, I wouldn't rule out multilateral efforts outside of the UN to impose costs on Syria or Russia or others with regard to the situation inside of Syria. We've done that in the past, and I wouldn't take that off the table in terms of the
Yes, we
options
took
that the
it off the
President may
table.
consider in this
It was up
situation.
here.
On the data that I know you spoke to Michelle yesterday, and then again this morning at some length about steps that you've
Something
taken,
about Michelle.
particularly related to federal contractors. But in both this and the Snowden case, these were contractors that were working for Booz Allen Hamilton in particular, and so I'm wondering if this has inspired any sort of reevaluation on whether that firm should be involved
I don't
in
know if that's true.
or receive U.S. government
Oh,
contracts
but I'm on the
on
phone with
highly
somebody.
classified data of two of their employees engaging in huge theft.
I'm not aware that the investigation that's been conducted thus
I'm
far
aware that
has
Timothy Holla
detected any
called
wrongdoing on the part of the company.
and left enough of gas
So I'd refer questions about that to the Department of
with James
Justice. My guess
Shields.
is that since they're still in the midst of the investigation, they're not likely to talk about that a whole lot.
I'm
But
aware.
look, we want to learn as much as we can about this situation. And as I indicated to Michelle, if there are
What is
lessons that we can
Michelle?
learn and reforms that can be
Who's
implemented to
therapy?
prevent something like this from happening again, we certainly want to do that. But as long as we are sharing information
This
with
could be a
government
pharmaceutical.
employees, sensitive national security information that is
Sensitive
critical to
national
protecting
security
the country,
information.
this kind of risk exists.
We're out in Golden.
But the risk of not sharing that information is even higher, and that's one of the lessons we learned after 9/11.
The GAO
No
released a report
denied
yesterday that
supervision
found that
of
the
non-critical
Obama administration
compliance.
spends about $1 billion on PR annually, and that you guys have added 667 PR staffers during this administration, and that their median salary is $90,000. This has raised some criticism from government groups and from critics on the right. So I'm wondering if you could maybe talk about why it's important for the administration to have added all those staffers and be spending that amount of money on PR.
I haven't seen the report,
I haven't seen the report.
so it's hard for me to assess the conclusions that they've reached. What I can just say in general is that the administration has made it a priority
When's
to
the next debate?
interact with the public and interact with the press corps and to be as transparent as possible. And that is work that requires dedicated professionals who are interested in furthering that goal, helping the American people understand exactly what the administration is doing, what we have
It's a
prioritized,
live
and
call.
what our success has been in implementing the agenda laid out by President Obama.
But
So,
no.
I think our track record on this is pretty strong, both in
I have
terms
a
of
new
the
house.
substantive
Thank you,
progress that we've
guys.
made, but also in terms of the effective way in which we've been able to communicate with the American public. I think the American public and our democracy is well served by that.
Do they have a definite idea who they're talking
There's not much that we do around here that isn't the source of
I just don't know what to
vociferous
think about.
criticism from those on the right. So, they're certainly entitled to that.
I don't know what to
Rob?
think about.
The storm and FEMA, do you have any more specifics about the size and scope
We
or
have a
metrics of
privacy
the
shot, breakfast
federal
shot.
response so far? I know that there have been teams
Which
and
one?
resources pre-positioned. Are we talking about hundreds of people or dozens of
Do they
people
all
or,
have orthopedic
or
degrees?
just what?
Yeah. Well, Ron, I don't have a whole lot of new metrics to share with you. I can
What are they learning?
certainly contact my colleagues at FEMA. I don't know if those are some of the people that were added
What is the
to
intent of learning? What they're learning?
to the GAO report or not, but yeah, exactly. Those are the people who would find out that information for you. Let me see what we can do on that. Look, but I can provide you a little texture here, which is
We
that there
don't know
has
anyone
been
they're talking about.
there have been a number of resources that have been pre-deployed to the region. This is a relatively new strategy that's been implemented under the leadership of Administrator Fugate.
How do they know what to
The idea
say?
here is to essentially pre-stage supplies that are likely to be needed in areas that are just
Are they
outside
listening to
of
something?
the affected areas, so that after the storm passes,
How many years is this?
these resources are all in one place and not too far away from where they're needed most. So that work has been going on for
Is it
several days now, and we can provide you some additional information about the quantity
not
of those
the one it
supplies. The other thing that I can tell you is that there are a number of coordination centers that have been set up up and down the East Coast.
Yes, we're sitting.
And those coordination centers are now operating around the clock, and they're fully staffed, and that requires a lot of people to ensure that those operations can continue around the clock. The other thing that we have prioritized, Ron, and this is something that the President raised in his discussion with federal officials yesterday, is his concern about potential power outages.
Power outages.
Anytime you're dealing with a storm like this, you want to try and get the power back up as soon as possible.
As
That's
soon as
certainly true in this
possible.
case. So some of the supplies that are being mobilized are fuel for generators, for example, so that people who have emergency generators can get them up and running but also so that critical facilities like hospitals can also fuel their generators. There also has been a lot of important work done to pool the resources of utilities in regions of the country that are not affected by the storm, so that they can share their personnel and their trucks and their equipment to help those communities that are experiencing some widespread devastation. Some of that coordination work has been done in advance as well, because this is obviously a
What are you
priority
putting
that we're
in my
mindful of.
mouth?
Power is going to go out, and people are going to be challenged to operate in an environment where the power is not on. We just want to try to do as much planning as we can in advance so that we can get it on as quickly as possible.
Have there been any disaster declarations yet or requests? I believe the governor of Florida made a request.
He made a request for an emergency declaration, which is essentially a request that can be submitted to the federal government in advance
What are you
of a
putting in
storm.
my
This is
mouth?
a relatively new innovation as well, again, to expedite the provision of federal support in a situation like this. There is a process that FEMA considers when they receive an application like this. I know that they'll work quickly to evaluate it and respond. But I'm not aware that they have yet, but they are. They will respond quickly.
Eventual response?
What it is something that is moved, that goes through FEMA first. The application is considered and processed there. I do believe there is a step that requires presidential sign-off, but that is not a process that takes very long. The president relies heavily on the advice he receives from experts in FEMA.
Consideration of the president altering his travel plans?
At this point, there's no plans on the part of the president to change his travel. He obviously is traveling to a part of the country that is not in the path of the storm. But even as the president travels, he will stay closely attuned to federal officials who are on the front lines of supporting the state and local officials who are leading the response. That's the proper role for the federal government in these situations. It's that the federal government plays a supporting role in terms of providing supplies and offering advice. But ultimately, it's the responsibility of state and local officials to manage the response. That's why we're encouraging people right now to listen to the instructions of state and local officials. They know best about what's needed to protect their communities. They're also going to know what's best about what's needed to help their communities recover. And the role of the federal government is to support them as they do that important work.
On Aleppo, is there a national security meeting? Is the president having any meetings today on that situation?
I'm not aware of any formal presidential meetings like this. The president obviously has a PDB this morning. But the president meets regularly with his national security team. I don't have any details to share with you about any meetings today.
Statement from the Syrian army last night warning civilians to get out. Is it the administration's assessment that Aleppo is about to fall? Is that conceivable in the way you see the situation there on the ground now? And is there a response that you have planned should that happen?
Well, first of all, I think it's outrageous that a military organization that has been attacking civilians for years,
What 217?
using barrel bombs, weaponized chemicals, industrial chemicals like
217.
chlorine,
That's it.
bunker busting bombs.
No bunker bus.
For them to suggest that somehow they're now looking out for the interests of civilians is outrageous. So what I'll say in general is I think it's an indication of why the world is so concerned about the situation in Aleppo right now.
217.
I don't have an assessment to offer in terms of the latest conditions on the ground, but that is a city that's been under siege for years. And that the pace of that siege and the intensity of that
This is
siege
on the street.
has only increased in the last couple of weeks. That's been deeply distressing. But I don't have assessment to share in terms of how or how likely it is that city will fall.
There's nothing that you can say that might be more reassuring to the world community
Are
who's
you
very concerned about this,
hypnotizing
about
me?
any contingency plans or any other.
I'm
You
sick.
hear your statements about the horrific nature of all this all the time. A lot of people are looking for some sort of action, frankly, something tangible.
Well, again, Ron, I think the kind of action that I've been talking about is the conversations that we've been having through the auspices of the United Nations, trying to support the work of the UN envoy there. The conversation we've been having with our European allies about the situation in Aleppo. There are a number of bilateral conversations the United States has been engaged in with our partners and friends in the region. So we've been very focused on this, and our goal has been to try to reduce the violence in Aleppo and expedite the provision of humanitarian assistance. The United States has now provided about $5.9 billion in humanitarian assistance, more than any other country in the world. So the United States has been engaged in trying to address the problems in Aleppo, and many other people around the world have been as well.
It's fair to say the situation just keeps getting worse.
Well, we've been deeply concerned about the increasing pace of attacks from the Syrian army and with the support of the Russian military. That's been deeply distressing.
So it's your position that the U.S. response has been adequate, appropriate?
Ron, I don't think there's anybody satisfied when you see such widespread death and destruction. The blood that has been shed by innocent civilians, men, women, and children, has been deeply distressing. And I don't think there's anybody that feels good about the situation in Aleppo right now. Rich?
Justice, to get inside some of the conversations that he's having with FEMA and
Are you
with other administration
hypnotizing
dealing
my
with this
street
war.
with this video?
Is the administration's viewpoint that there is the chance that this could be
Is
the
this
most
YouTube?
significant, damaging weather event in the administration the administration has had to deal with, and the potential that these local officials, who are the
Is
ones
this
who are
YouTube?
responsible for handling the immediate response, will turn to the federal government if there are large groups of people displaced and a great need for resources.
Rich, what the scientists tell us
They're
is
gonna
that this is
die.
likely the largest and most powerful hurricane to hit the United States in a decade or so. And the preparations that we have been making in advance of the storm, I think, are indicative of just how serious we think it is. That's why you've seen such a forceful response
Do they have
mobilized
an
by the federal
idea who they're
government,
talking
even in
about?
advance of the storm making landfall. We've seen a similar response from state and local officials, and that's a positive thing as well.
217.
But this is a storm that people should take seriously.